Is caught for a touchdown. What a grab by Jackson.
Macklin is inside the 10. Down the sideline he goes. And defender fell down, and Austin across the 20 to the end zone. How about that for wide open Jennings? Caught. Touchdown, Packers.
Welcome everyone to another edition of the Fantasy Gridiron. My name's the Big AC, here as always with Scotty Fortune. Scotty, after week 2, we realized that there's a lot of players going up in value in the value stock market. In our opinion, there's a couple of guys that I think are just valued a little bit too high that you should consider trading. Number 1 on our list that you should consider trading in a non-PPR league is Matt Forte.
Now, before you Forte owners go crazy out there, I like Forte a lot. I'm not saying you should get rid of him. His name even sounds like my name, for crying out loud. How can you not love this guy? But in a non-PPR league, he's been putting up crazy numbers that he is not likely to put up all season.
Right.
And as Barber gets more and more healthy, Forte's probably going to lose some touches in goal line type situations.
Also, we think if you have a lot of running back depth, like we told you to draft, if you are weak on wide receiver, we really think a lot of people are going to overvalue Matt Forte and in a non-PPR league give you the world for him, especially certain wide receivers. We honestly think you could get a wide receiver the caliber of a Roddy White, a Calvin Johnson, an Andre Johnson, and maybe a Greg Jennings. All those receivers I think people might consider trading to get Matt Forte, when we quietly think that Matt Forte is just a little bit overhyped in a non-PPR league right now.
Absolutely, AC. And most likely guys that have those receivers may have drafted extra receivers. Now they're a little deeper there. They might be hurting at running back. Maybe they had Jamal Charles or something. And now all of a sudden you're getting, Roddy White for Matt Forte. Now, if you have a good running back on your bench, that's a fantastic trade for you.
Exactly. If you have the depth, it's definitely something you should consider. A couple of running backs that if you can get anything for them, you want to do it. D'Angelo Williams, Jonathan Stewart, these guys you just want to get off your team as soon as you possibly can, Scotty.
That's right. Now, we're not saying you get rid of them for absolutely nothing. But if you can get a fair deal for D'Angelo Williams right now, pull the trigger. It is clear that Carolina is just throwing all their cards on the table this year and slinging the ball. They are not going with their just keep running philosophy from years past. So if you can get something for those guys, you probably want to get rid of them.
And if you are wondering why we're jumping ship with D'Angelo Williams and Jonathan Stewart, after weeks 1 and 2, D'Angelo Williams and Jonathan Stewart's yards rushing combined are less than Cam Newton's yards rushing. So just something you might want to think about. Clearly they're thinking one way, they're not thinking the ground game. If you could trade these guys and someone wants them, definitely something you should consider. After that, finally, another running back, Sean Green. Okay, this is kind of a situation that we were talking about. He had a good game. This is what you wanted. Now is the time to trade Sean Green.
Absolutely, especially if you can find a Jets fan in your league. This is, the week that Sean Green had a good game. However, you cannot count on him for consistency throughout the season. So if you can get a decent guy for Sean Green right now, and you can upgrade somewhere, like if you can get Steven Jackson for Sean Green, pull the trigger on that all day.
And probably no one is going to do a straight up deal, but if you can do Sean Green and package him with maybe like a Jordy Nelson type receiver to get Steven Jackson, I think that would be a very good trade. They're not going to be blowing out the Jaguars 34-3 every week. Sean Green isn't going to get too many carries, so don't look at this week as your defining example and why Sean Green is going to be a great fantasy back. If someone else thinks that, great. Go find that person and trade him Sean Green for some value. Those are the guys we think you should trade. Now, there's definitely some guys you want to trade for. And these are guys that haven't had the stellar fantasy weeks that, we think they will. Number 1 on our list for sure is Chris Johnson from the Titans. He's had a couple of bad fantasy weeks, and we suggest if you have someone in your league that has Chris Johnson that probably started the season 0-2 because of the lack of his fantasy value, now is the time to get him.
Absolutely, AC. Chris Johnson is going to explode at some point this season. Remember, he started late. It's going to take him a few games to get, into his groove, and then he's going to be a stud. Now, you probably got to give up 2 guys for Chris Johnson. If you have a guy like Cedric Benson, or if you have, you know, a guy like Beanie Wells even, and then you have, you know, Bo, and you can package one of those running backs and Bo together and get Chris Johnson, you'll be looking really good later on towards fantasy playoff time. You'll be a championship type team.
If you can get a guy who's desperate, needs a solid running back, needs a receiver, Dwayne Bowe and Beanie Wells or Chris Johnson, if they're offering you that trade or they're willing to accept that trade, now's the time to act. Chris Johnson didn't practice all off season long. He's just getting into the thick of things. He's going to be a fantasy beast. Another guy we really like, Stevie Johnson from Buffalo. Yeah, he's had a couple of good games, but no one really seems to care because he's on the Buffalo Bills. Something about, like we said in our last video, when you're on the Buffalo Bills, it just no one seems to look at your numbers. Look at Fred Jackson, for example. Fred Jackson has had some ridiculous fantasy numbers. If he was wearing a Chris Johnson jersey in Tennessee, people would be saying Chris Johnson is one of the best fantasy backs right now. But because it's a Buffalo Bills player, no one seems to care. Thus, the same thing with Stevie Johnson. They're undervaluing this guy as a wide receiver when he's putting up huge fantasy numbers as a wide receiver. Now's the time to get him.
Absolutely, AC. If you look at Johnson and you look at Jennings, their numbers are virtually interchangeable the first 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't think Steve Johnson's going to have as good of a year as Greg Jennings will. So before, like, you know, Melon Knight emails me and goes crazy, you know, that's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is Steve Johnson you can get for significantly cheap compared to a guy like Greg Jennings, and I'm not so sure their numbers are going to be all that different.
And it's only week 2, but Fitzpatrick is not slowing down. I mean, it doesn't matter who he's facing. He's putting up big numbers, and clearly Stevie Johnson is his first look on every single passing route. He's the guy he wants to get the ball to, so clearly something you got to consider for fantasy owners. And number 3 on our list, a guy I love, not really a fan favorite out there, but quarterback for the San Diego Chargers, Philip Rivers.
Absolutely. Philip Rivers has had a couple of decent weeks. If he's been your quarterback the last 2 weeks and you've lost, it hasn't been because of him, that's for sure. However, he's thrown some picks and he hasn't had Philip Rivers type top quarterback type numbers. He is going to be just fine. If you can get Philip Rivers to a guy that's hurting and you have an extra running back to throw in and then you're throwing in an okay quarterback, pull the trigger and get Philip Rivers, because he's going to be good.
If you drafted Philip Rivers, you're expecting top 5 numbers, and he hasn't been putting up top 5 numbers. Yeah, it's only week 2, but no, he's thrown already 4 interceptions, something you really want to consider. And if you can find a fantasy owner that, is willing to trade Philip Rivers for not that much, clearly you're going to have to give up something decent. But if he's ready to jump ship on Philip Rivers, now's the time. He has a pretty good schedule coming up. Besides facing the Jets week 7, I don't really see anything too bad ahead of him for Philip Rivers. He's going to put up huge numbers. He's starting to connect with Vincent Jackson. He's starting slow with Antonio Gates, yeah. But clearly, Philip Rivers is getting used to his offense like he did last season, and he's going to put up some huge fancy numbers.
That's right, AC. And remember this when you're trading, too. Try to find the guys, if you're 2-0, try to trade with guys that are 0-2, because they're a little bit desperate right now, and they clearly need to win. Probably 3 out of the next 4 or 5 games, or they're done for the year. So that's where you can put together a package and really improve your team. If you're 0-2, you need to think about your team like this. Have I gotten unlucky and been against the top scorer in the last couple of weeks, like AC has?
Yeah.
Or has it just been that maybe I made a mistake on a couple of guys? If so, maybe you need to trade one of your guys and get a little bit of a package deal.
Right.
And
cutting your hair isn't going to solve all your problems, so clearly, you got to try to change up some things. There's a couple of rules that we always say involved with trades. If you're a winning team, don't trade 1 player for 2. You already have a good team, so don't try to trade down, trade up to improve your players. If you always try to seek out teams with a losing record, because they're more likely to trade with you, and always look for running back depth. The running backs are going to get you those championship rings you need for your fantasy season. Guys, if you have any questions at all, any questions on any trades, we've got a lot of trade questions, please email us at fantasygridiron@hotmail.com. Until then, stay tuned for our Week 3 matchup video. I'm the Big AC Andy Chevalier here with Scotty Fortune. We'll see you next time, and good luck on the Fantasy Gridiron.